Hello and welcome to our Wilder Blean, Wilder Woodlands webinar. We are just letting everybody arrive and then we'll be starting the webinar shortly. Everybody should have their cameras off and are muted, but you have had the opportunity to submit some questions which we'll be answering later on. Just to let you know at this point, the webinar will be recorded so that we can share the recording with other people. Yeah, hopefully you will find it informative. If we just allow a few more minutes to let people come in, and then we'll start with our presentation. Okay, Cristina, are you ready with the slides, or would you like me to share those?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to hand over now to Simon and Cristina to do our presentation today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Simon Bateman-Brown. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for Land Management, which means I head up the estates team, the team that manages all of our nature reserve and roadside nature reserve. And
hi, I'm Cristina. I'm the Wilder Blean Reserve Manager. So I manage the site, the Bison and the Rangers, and the stuff that happens there.
So welcome, everybody. We'll get straight into it. So this is a map of our West Blean site, our Wilder Blean project, 550 hectare site. The bison are going to be in 200 hectares. Currently they're in 50 hectares. We'll explain why as we go through the presentation. Generally livestock, apart from the bison, have got a further 250 hectares to the site. And then those that are familiar with West Blean, we've got Thorndon Wood on the other side of Thorndon Wood Road, which is our control area, our traditional management area, which is around 100 hectares of ancient woodland that we're managing with our volunteers and with contractors. And again, we'll discuss that a little bit more as we go through the project. But this gives you a good idea of where the bison are, where the other livestock are on the site, the footpaths and routes and compartments within the site as well. So the Wilder Blean project, well, why did we look at the Wilder Blean project? Why did we bring it into concept? Looking at conservation generally, not just in the UK, but further afield as well. And conservation efforts generally are doing brilliantly, but they're not making the efforts they need to make. Conservation is in decline, wildlife is in decline, there's a biodiversity crisis. The traditional forms of conservation management just aren't really cutting it. They're not doing what they need to be doing. There's not that positive upward curve that we need at the moment. So we need to look at something different. We need to look at a different approach and trial different things to see if we can make that big difference, that big changes for positive action, really, within our conservation world for wildlife. So we're looking at the Wilder Blean project. We thought bringing back a large herbivore was that missing component, something that we could look to do. I'll discuss a little bit more about how we did it and why we did it as we go through. But we developed the vision for the Wilder Blean, which was looking at, which was published in 2019, working with Wilder Trust to look at how we bring together this project, how we bring European bison back to the UK, how we bring them into this habitat to start that management. We put together our project and we were lucky enough in March 2020 to get funding from People's Postcode Lottery Dream Fund grant, which enabled the setup costs for the project itself. So it allowed the fencing to go in that needed to be going in. It allowed staff to be recruited to manage the project and manage the bison when they finally arrived as well. And then as things moved forward, in spring 2021, we started looking at the Wilder Blean initiative. So the wider impact of Blean, not just Blean itself, but other areas within the Blean complex owned by organisations like the Woodlands Trust, the RSPB, but also private landowners and bringing into other organisations like the Forestry Commission, for example, and how we could all work together to learn from what we were doing at West Blean and replicate that out around the landscape. So it's about pushing the boundaries. It's about trying something different, as I said, and it's looking at wilder grazing animals, which essentially is what European bison are. Now, this is not something new for Kent Wildlife Trust. We've been managing reserves for decades with various forms of grazing animals. We've got about 1,000 animals total managing our reserves at the moment, including various breeds of cattle, sheep, ponies, pigs, goats, so all sorts. And this is something that we have staff and expertise on for many, many years. So it's not new for us. European bison were not our first animal, if you like. It was an extension of something we've been doing for a very long time. And it's looking at really where animals can come in and take over the management of habitats for conservation, where traditionally we've been doing human intervention, we've been doing copsing works, or we've been taking machines or people, volunteers, contractors in to do the work in our, not just woodlands, but other habitats as well. But actually, there's a natural solution. For millennia, our nature has been doing it itself. It's more recently that we've stepped in to take over and try and replicate that ourselves with more artificial or intervention techniques. But using a natural solution is really the preferred way. It's the right way to do it. It's the natural way of doing it. It's the way the ecosystem has developed to in balance with that. We were looking at expanding not just our reach on Wilder Blean itself, but further afield as well. As I say, working with Woodland Trust and working with RSPB, but other landowners, other neighbours as well, to bring them along on that journey. And we're looking at opportunities around income delivery, not just for ourselves, but for people in the wider landscape, wider context. So acting as a benchmark demonstration project for urgent nature and climate action, as it says, Wilder Blean is already catalysing positive change. It's making a difference already. We're seeing the impact the animals are having. We're seeing wildlife coming back. We're seeing the changes to habitat that needs to be done. So the natural behaviour of the animals themselves, different breeds, different species in the right place will do different things to that habitat, different management of that habitat. So the pigs are doing the rootling, the browsing, grazing of different animals, the bark stripping that the bison themselves are doing, the dust bathing, and some of the larger cattle will do that sort of thing as well. Tree felling themselves, the larger animals knocking over some of the smaller trees, and the dung themselves actually changing part of the habitat as well. With different animals, different dung, different consistencies, different etc., bringing different things. And it's really looking at that ecosystem jigsaw puzzle, if you like. An ecosystem is designed to be in balance. Everything within an ecosystem works together to create a balanced habitat, a natural habitat. And when you start taking pieces of that jigsaw puzzle away, it doesn't interact properly together. The full picture isn't there anymore. And what we've got in UK conservation, certainly, and certainly much further abroad as well, is lots of missing pieces. And one of those missing pieces, and probably a quarter piece if you like, is European bison, that large herbivore that's been absent from the UK for millennia, for a very long time. There are other missing pieces as well, other introductions, other that may be planned for the future, not necessarily by ourselves, but by other organisations, hopefully coming back into the UK. Things like pine marten and red squirrel that are missing from large areas of habitats within the UK that really need to be part of that ecosystem. And of course, looking at natural predators as well. There's no apex predator in this system either, which is something that's quite notably missing. And in the future, hopefully, we'll see reintroduced at some point in some form. Next slide, please.
Right, so I want to talk you through a bit what's happened so far. So the bison herd arrived in July 2022, and we started off with 3 females. Bison work in a matriarchal society, so you normally start with the matriarch coming out first, getting to know the area and leading the rest of the herd. And then a few months later, we had a bull join the herd. We also had a surprise calf because one of the females we received was already pregnant. And then quite quickly, the bull got to work and we started breeding on site, which has been really amazing news for us and kind of shows that what we're doing is working. So it shows that the bison are really well adapted to the habitat they're currently in and doing well. And so they've been breeding quite a bit. Technical issues. Okay. So yeah, so the reason, like as Simon said, we brought the bison on is because they're such an important puzzle piece. And when people talk about biodiversity, we often talk about diversity of species, but what's actually underlying and much more important is like diversity of behavior. Diversity of behavior with different animals creates niches and homes for other species and has a knock-on effect. And that's why bison specifically are called ecosystem engineers. because unlike cattle, they have a much wider range of behavior. So they don't just graze and browse, they do dust bathing, they do that very efficiently, creating bare ground in a woodland that otherwise wouldn't exist, and a lot of insects depend on. They're really great at eating bark. They're really great at like creating standing deathwood, which is another one of these like puzzle pieces that we've really been missing, because there's been a tradition of cleaning up woodlands and a lack of that dynamic element of things falling over and leaving it there, to have that standing wood, which is so important for lots of different species. Next slide, please. So as I just said, they do these all different things. So bring barking is something that they do gradually, creating a standing deadwood. They also open up rides and they create glades. So they create that open space which a woodland needs to like regenerate itself. Because without open space where light comes in, you won't have germination, you won't have native flora coming through. And especially on our site, which has been planted up with conifers in the past, which makes it a really, really dark covered woodland where nothing else grows underneath. So it becomes a very, very species poor type of woodland. And opening that up and letting new species come in, mixing up the diversity of the tree species itself, but also the structure, is then what helps lots of other species to return and create that resilient ecosystem that we need. And so their diversity is one thing, but the other thing is also like the sheer bulk of them, because they're such large animals. They can knock over trees that smaller species like cattle and ponies can't do, and also the sheer quantity of how they graze and what they eat makes them much more efficient in a dense woodland. Next slide, please. So what we're after really is complexity in the habitat, and people often ask me like, why do you need complexity in a habitat? And that is quite closely linked to climate change as well. When we think about climate change, we kind of just think about rising temperatures in itself. But what we're already seeing really clearly right now is like changing weather patterns, things that are not in sync anymore. And so when you have, for example, an early spring effect where we have a really, really warm early spring coming in, maybe already in February, trees reacting to it really quickly, insects kind of missing that a bit, the birds start breeding a bit too late, they miss the food peak, and that's kind of an example of how things get out of sync. And one of the ways to fix that is by creating complexity in an ecosystem. If you have lots of species fulfilling different roles with slightly different behaviors, is much better adapted to these changing patterns. And that's like one of the keystone things to make an ecosystem resilient, is literally having complexity in species diversity, in structure, and all the other things that go with it. And so Natural England like recognized that that is like a very important factor in managing the blean specifically, but ancient woodlands effectively. And what we've been doing in the past, as Simon mentioned, we'd be going in with machines, but due to the sheer size of our site, it's quite difficult, especially the West Blean, which is extremely wet in the winter and extremely dry in the summer. It can become quite a challenge to reach certain areas that we as humans just reach with difficulty, whereas the bison can get in anywhere. Also, as we go in as humans, we do work in the winter, and it's a bit of a shock to the system. It's quite an immediate effect. But what the bison do, they come in, they do that change gradually and much more sustainably over a long term. And again, as I said before, bison are much more equipped to do it compared to grazing animals, just because they don't have the right size or the right sort of behavior to have the same outcome. Next slide, please.
Okay, so that's the concept. The concept sound, the idea of bringing the European bison in as that missing piece of the ecosystem engineer to make the changes that we need to make to these habitats to improve them for biodiversity. But the concept sound, the logistics and practicalities were very complicated, very complex to say the least. We have we can go on to the next slide actually, some details there. So we have a dangerous wild animals legislation or license required for this project. Now, dangerous wild animals legislation is really put together for people that have got, for example, a venomous pet at home, to have the permissions through the local council to have those that pet in place at home, and the proper bits and pieces in place to ensure they don't escape. What we didn't have in the UK, and still don't really, is any adequate legislation to address things like European bison coming in. And in the absence of anything better, the Dangerous Wild Animals legislation was applied to European bison coming in because it's not been done before. It's made things incredibly difficult and challenging as a project. It means, as that classification, it means the European bison cannot interact with members of the public. So where we have public rights of way crossing West Blean, we have to ensure that the European bison do not directly interact with those public rights of way. Now that made it very complicated because we've got 5 separate compartments. If you look at the rights of way, there's a breakout parts of the site. 5 different compartments are made up of the areas where we want the bison, the European bison, to be grazing, to be managing, to be working in. And the only way we can connect those areas together without the bison actually being present on the public right of way is to create our bison bridges. So something to span from one compartment to the next. Now we've thankfully created 2 bison bridges this year, completed earlier this year, which now enable the bison to inhabit 100 hectares of the site. So we're looking at 200 hectares totally, but at the moment they're now 100 hectares. They were for quite a while just in 50 hectares because we didn't have those bridges in place. We are looking for 2 further bridges to be installed next year, be next summer, which will then open up the full area of 200 hectares for the European bison. Now, on top of the need for the bridges to connect those different areas together, we also need to create or put in place fencing to prevent bison and people interacting directly. And not just one layer of fencing, but a total of 3. So we had a perimeter fencing, first a general livestock fence, and then we have 2 layers of fencing specifically for our bison areas. This is all dictated by the Dangerous Wild Animals. It's not something the Kent Wildlife Trust wanted to do. It's not something that's done in other countries where European bison are present in similar conservation projects. But it is what's been put in place for the UK and the rules that we have to obey and work with. So there's 2 layers of fencing, electric fence and a people fence around all of the bison areas. In total, it's nearly 45 kilometres of fencing that have had to be installed to this project. And this does make this project very difficult to replicate elsewhere. Can I have the next slide, please? So these 2, as I was saying, 2 bridges that have been installed so far, and the other 2 bridges will connect those areas together for the bison to be able to inhabit it. We are hopeful that by connecting those areas together, by having the bison at full 200 hectares, we'll be able to gather the evidence needed to show that actually their actions in their habitat, the changes they're making, their role as an ecosystem engineer are necessary, not just necessary, they're absolutely vital for UK conservation, and not necessarily just in woodlands either, but in other habitats we can prove it with other projects hopefully going forward. We want this project to be a pioneering project. We wanted to prove the concept of what we're trying to do here so that it can be applied elsewhere. But really, in order to do that, we need the Dangerous Wild Animals legislation not to apply to European bison. They need to be applied through domestic licenses, as they would for any other cattle. It's worth saying that European bison themselves, behaviourally, are not dangerous. They're as dangerous as any other cattle. For example, a farm might have in a field with a public right of way running through it. In fact, a lot less so. They will react if cornered or threatened, like any other animal would do, but they're not inherently aggressive or dangerous. So the term dangerous wild animal, please don't take that as a description of the European bison themselves. They're not by any means. If we go on to the next slide, please. And just a quick map showing where the current and future bridges are. So the red circles are the 2 completed bridges completed this year, and 2 yellow circles show the bridges that are going to be completed next year. Next slide, please. And some of the impact so far within the project. So as I say, two bridges have already been built. So halfway through that process, we've got several species that have been found on the site through the project so far, including furrow clearing moth, which has come back into some of the cleared areas on the sites and the project, which is fantastic. Additional 50 hectares now that the 2 bridges are in for the bison, so 100 hectares total they now have. We're working with 4 species licenses through Natural England at the moment for the project, primarily around the building of the bridges themselves, but also generally for the bison inhabiting the ancient woodland triple SI site. And so far, we've got 85% of the total project funding secured, which is absolutely amazing. But we still need to find that additional 15% of the project so we can get everything that we need for the project to succeed. And next slide, please.
Just talking a bit about outcomes and what we want to see. So we talked a lot about, or I did talk a lot about the ecology, and that's quite obvious our most vital outcome that we want to see. We want to see the health of the woodland improve. We want to see increased climate change resilience. But also, as Simon mentioned, this is a pioneering project. So we want to use this project to kind of create a wider understanding of what we're doing, our relationship with these animals, and how that can be used in different projects. So as we said before, it's about demonstrating that bison aren't inherently dangerous animals. And it's the same as with cattle. It's much more about engaging with people, educating people, for us to relearn really to live in and around nature, and finding ways that both we as humans, we can go and enjoy nature and connect with it, which is so important for mental well-being and our health. But at the same time, making sure our ecosystems thrive, which in turn provide ecosystem services that we humans need. So far, we've reached hundreds of millions of people globally, and we've spoken to so many decision makers and have already made great strides. So this project really allowed us to have that outreach, which has been fantastic, not just for the project, but also to kind of spread that kind of messaging that we need, that changing of understanding of how we treat nature, how we manage it, and how we believe it can improve in the future. Next slide, please. And so just talking briefly about some berries that we've experienced. Obviously, it hasn't been just easy sailing. One example is like the 18 months it's taken to secure the multiple licenses and work with Natural England. So we have a dormice license, a heath fertility license, a fire clearing license, a bison release license. And all of that has taken a really, really long time, in part because we're the first ones to do it. And then there's a cost obviously attached to it as well. And so for us, we do see as one of our primary roles to really kind of show how it can be done so that people following suit in the future wilding projects won't have to jump through as many hoops, that the process might be smoother, shorter, and more cost effective as well. The lovely picture of the fiery clearwing moth. It's a lovely species. We're really excited to see it back, but it did throw a spanner in the works when it was discovered on site. It was discovered on site in part due to the works that we did, because fire clearing, they thrive on dock. Dock thrives in disturbed ground. So where we had started some construction areas and created disturbed ground, we created the perfect habitat for fire clearing. This meant in turn, though, that we had to do more licensing and go through new processes, which then delayed certain things, and it was a real knock-on effect. So I think we'd also like to really look at how we can change these processes to make them maybe a little bit more straightforward, and again, reduce unnecessary costs and shorten the timescale, just to make it more feasible for projects in the future. Next slide, please.
Back to me. So just a few slides on woodlands and the inherent value of woodlands, such as ancient woodlands at West Blean. So in the last century, we've lost around 70% of our ancient woodlands. Now, our ancient woodlands are irreplaceable habitats. They've been evolving for thousands of years. They're defined as since 1600 AD, so at least 400 years old. But the reality is that most precious of our ancient woodlands have been in those last 400 years. So most of our ancient woodlands are thousands of years old. And they've been evolving actually all that time. The soils are incredibly precious and really can't be replaced. So once they're gone, they're gone. And we've lost 70% in just the last 100 years, which is incredible. And only 2.5% left across the country, which again is a tragic statistic, really. So looking after our ancient woodlands is really, really important. Not only making sure we retain them and don't lose them, but making sure we manage them in an appropriate way so that they are in ecological good condition. Next slide, please. So we do have a landscape, I suppose, in the UK of fragmented habitats, different habitats in different areas where there were one contiguous habitat that are now broken up, whether that's through farming practices, developments, settlements being created, expansion of populations, etc. Lots and lots of pressures on our habitats, on our landscape, that mean a lot of it is now quite fragmented. So trying to link that back together again is really important. That's one of the things we're trying to do with the Blean wildscape approach. There's a lot of what's called planted ancient woodland sites, pause sites within the Blean area. So West Blean itself is a planted ancient woodland site. Large areas of it were clear felled in the 70s and 80s to plant conifer trees, largely Corsican pine. It's essentially this is a cash crop, softwood, done for commercial reasons. But it's done at the expense of wildlife. It's done at the expense of that traditional ancient woodland, broadleaf woodland that was there before. So for those of you that are familiar with West Blean, there's not a lot of old trees there. Most of the old trees were taken down in that time. Most of the ancient trees are now gone. There's a few dotted about, but not many, not what there would have been just a few decades ago. So it's about protecting those sort of areas and about re-establishing them where we can as well, allowing those natural processes to come through to allow regeneration of broadleaf trees to come back, allow their soils to be preserved, and allow our ancient woodlands to be protected. Without that, we have, as it says there, lack of biodiversity, reduction of habitat diversity. It's susceptible to the effects of climate change, including increased floods, increased wildfires, to various times of the year. So it really is important to be managed appropriately. Next slide, please. So West Blean itself in Thorndon Woods is an ancient woodland, over 550 hectares, designated as such and as a triple SI. And it has an ancient drove road, the roadfall that runs through the site as well. Next slide, please. Managing woodlands. So managing woodlands is something we've been doing for a long time, not just with animals, but with our volunteers and contractors as well. So our wardens volunteers are out there doing copsing, clearing of things like rhododendron and creating deadwood paths and managing rides. Now, a lot of that does still need to go on. We can't use natural solutions everywhere. It's not appropriate to all our sites or all the areas of our sites. And it's also important to have that in place to compare and contrast with the work that the animals, the livestock themselves are doing. So we monitor it. We look at the differences. We look at the species that are coming through. We look at the impacts through all sorts of different surveys. You can see there, and many more besides, to look at the changes these different management approaches have. Next slide, please.
Right. So we did talk a lot about bison, but we also have different grazing animals on site. So as we've seen on the map before, we have the bison areas, we have what we call the proxy areas, and then the human intervention area. So in the proxy area, which is everything encompassing West Blean outside of the bison compartments, we have already trialed different ancient breeds, and it will also allow us to further compare how specifically the bison impact with their grazing compared to traditional breeds. So the project started off with Exmoor ponies and longhorn cattle, which have been on site for about 2 years. Through the monitoring that we do, that Simon just mentioned, we keep an eye on things, and so we can see how things are improving, or maybe not as much as we would like, and it allows us to fine-tune it. It allows us to kind of learn life on the project. So as the project goes on, we keep learning and then keep maybe changing and tweaking certain things. And so one of the big changes that came in this year is that we decided to come back with fell ponies. Now, literally just a few weeks ago, they arrived. And then we also decided not to bring longhorn cattle back, but try out a different ancient breed that is better adapted to the density of the woodland we have here. So we're currently looking at potentially bringing back Sussex cattle, which we have used in other dense woodland in the Blean complex very successfully. We also have Iron Age pigs, and they're a completely different piece in the puzzle. Iron Age pigs mainly impact their habitat through rootling. And they are, for example, able to tackle certain invasive species that otherwise don't get grazed. So bracken is the classic example. It's a type of fern that's very, very invasive and nothing really eats it. But Iron Age pigs, they come in and they rootle for the roots and have an impact on them. They also, through their rootling, they're loosening up the soil, making it ready for germination. So we get higher germination rates in rootled areas. And also they're able to bring back ancient seed banks. Because this is an ancient woodland, we have seeds in the ground that may have been there dormant for over 100 years. And by the pigs going in and rootling up the ground, they bring those ancient seeds back to life and allow them to germinate. And so all of that then gets contrasted to what the bison are doing in their area through their behavior. And so we're able to collect all of that data and compare what's happening where. Next slide, please. So basically, just to kind of reiterate a bit what our vision is, what we want to achieve is to create like a biologically rich, extensive and connected woodland. And not just at West Blean, but also looking further afield through working with neighbouring NGOs who are also large landowners, and creates that big network. Because even if we manage to create a very healthy ecosystem pocket where we are, for a lot of species, that won't be enough. Most species have large migratory routes, so they need that landscape connectivity. And next to climate change, fragmentation is the biggest driver of species extinction, specifically in the UK, where we have tradition of having lots of nature reserves, but very small pockets here and there, and not enough connect up to allow species to really thrive. And next to that, we also obviously want wildlife and people to be able to live harmoniously. And that's where the Bison Bridges were like a huge piece to achieve this, because it meant that we not cutting off any like public rights of way, we're not cutting off access, while also allowing the bison to get through and roam into wider areas of the woodland. So it is about climate resilience, healthy ecosystem, connectivity, and also engagement with people, the mental and physical health benefits that has. And we would like to create a strong local culture around it. This will then also impact local businesses. So we'd love to like work more on green businesses, creating opportunities for the local population to really benefit from this project. Next slide, please. And so we really think we've marked kind of like a new area for conservation with this. As Simon mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have been doing the same for a really long time, and it has definitely helped stopping lots of species going completely extinct. But unfortunately, with the pressures that we have nowadays around climate change and fragmentation, it is not enough. And so the Bison Project, together with the bridges, it's just a new innovative way of managing nature and helping us to reverse all the negative impacts that we've seen. And so the first step is, for us, the first step was to create the West Blean Wilder Blean project. And then the next phase will be to work with neighbouring landowners so that we can connect up the Wilder Blean complex. And the third phase is then to look further afield and looking at one of these big cut-off points like motorways, looking at wildlife bridges over motorways to create a big wild landscape that goes all the way from Stockmarsh all the way down to the lowest tower. Next slide, please.
Okay. So that concludes the presentation itself. We did get some questions sent in advance, so Cristina, I'll quickly go through those and answer those now. So we had a question about the bison themselves. Acknowledging, thank you very much, that we look after them very well, but asking, will this continue and ensuring they won't be killed or culled if they become too many for the habitat themselves to sustain them? No, we won't be looking to cull any of the European bison. We're looking at as a programme to establish other projects in the UK and also elsewhere in Europe. So while our breeding herd, we do move the animals around to other projects as and when. So if we does look like we're having too many animals, the impact is too great, we will look at some movements into other projects. And conversely, we'll bring some other animals back in from other projects into our project as well. That enables genetic diversity through the breeding programme too. So that's done in combination with Wildwood Trust and with the EEP to make sure that the right bison are going to the right places and that we're not causing any impact or negative impact to the site itself by having too many. It being a breeding programme, you can't obviously control it that well. Hopefully that answers that question. But another question, are you planning on putting bison on any other Kent reserves? Certainly not in the short or medium term. The Dangerous Wild Animals Act is quite prohibitive in terms of enabling that to happen elsewhere. And most of our other sites are too small or potentially too fragile to have a mega herbivore on as well. You really need quite large areas. And so 200 hectares is what we're looking at. That really is sort of the minimum you want to have for European bison. There's not that many nature reserves managed by Kent Wildlife Trust that are of that extent that would absorb a mega herbivore. Again, we're really looking at that defragmentation, that wider landscape approach to it, where bison could be part of the solution for that. But individual nature reserves, when they can be quite isolated and quite fragmented, it's not necessarily an answer to that. We are grazing over 60% of our nature reserves, though, with our conservation grazers, with a wilding approach. So Sussex cattle and longhorn cattle and pigs and goats that I was mentioning earlier, they are present on over 60% of our nature reserves, doing the job that a lot of animals will be doing in a natural ecosystem. Again, I hope that answers that question. We had a question about monitoring as well.
Yeah, so there's a question that came in specifically about breeding bird populations and if we've been monitoring them and what the data is showing so far. So we did an extremely extensive baseline study that looked at birds, but also at invertebrates and anything else that would be impacting bird population. And now we've been collecting data ongoing since the start of the project. I always say, obviously, we do have a lot of data and a lot of results already, but because of environmental fluctuations, I'm always like very careful not to go like, oh, these are the results and we have an increase or a decline, because it's much too early to say that. We can show the fluctuations that we've had, but until we collect data for about 10 years, a long-term study, this is when we really get like the interesting questions answered. We also started a really exciting new partnership with DICE through the E3 grant, where we're setting up a much more robust long-term study. We're looking at new tech, moving away from audiomos, going to song meters, which allow us as well to like monitor bats and breeding birds specifically much more efficiently. And so that will give us much more information. And so the idea is the way we collect data is that we have a grid over the whole site that includes the bison area, the proxy area, and the human intervention area. So data gets collected in the same way. And there is baseline data that gets collected year on year on year that then shows us increase in species diversity or abundance. We can look at specific taxa, and we can also overlay that data with the tracking data we have from the bison or other grazing animals. So we can specifically show the changes that are happening depending on which animal is present and doing what. So I hope that answers that question as well.
And the final question we had to come in was, how are you planning on scaling conservation efforts to connect Blean up with other conservation areas of Kent and the UK? I think we've probably answered that through the presentation itself, but just to reiterate, we're looking at a wider landscape approach. We're looking at the European bison being a proof of concept and project. We're not expecting dozens of other projects in the UK to start up with the current legislation in place that is very expensive, very prohibitive. Having all that fencing and DWAs in place and not being able to interact across public rights of way, it makes it very difficult for that to be replicated elsewhere at the moment. If that changes in time, hopefully we'll see other projects of European bison coming through and using what we're doing in Blean as the blueprint to establish that as things move forward. Okay, thank you very much.
Simon, we've actually had one additional question come in through the chat, which I wondered whether you could answer, which is, are the two bison bridges already open, and when will the other two open?
So the two bison bridges already in are open to the public, so they established that public right of way going across that area there. The gates themselves to the bison to move back and forward have not been properly opened yet. We're waiting for various, well, you might be able to answer better than me, actually.
Yeah, so there's always like a lot of elements when we decide to do these things, and there's a lot to do also with the herd dynamic. So well-being obviously is incredibly important to us, and so there has been, just when we finished the bison bridges, there had been a lot of changes in the herd. So we had the arrival of 3 new calves as well, which was amazing. But unfortunately, we also had to say goodbye to that matriarch, which was extremely, extremely old and herds current. So there has been a lot of changes in the herd. And right now, we're seeing in the herd a new matriarch establishing herself. And so we opted, for welfare reasons, to wait for the dynamic to like reestablish itself before making another big change and opening up a new wider area.
Lovely, thank you very much. And yeah, a huge thank you to Cristina and Simon for our webinar. And for those of you attending, thank you very much for your patience through our technical issues. I apologise for those, and we will send out the slides and review the recording to send you a useful summary of the webinar today. As you'll have seen from Simon and Cristina's presentation, a huge amount of work goes into not only Blean and West London Woods Reserve, but also across all of our woodland reserves in Kent. And that's why we're taking part in the Big Give Christmas Challenge. For 1 week this week, we are looking to raise £75,000, and every single pound that is donated will be doubled. We'd be really grateful for your support. The link is included in the slide, but we'll also make sure that we include that in the email. Thank you again for coming, and thank you for your support and your patience. I'm now going to bring the meeting to a close, and I want to say thank you and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
All right.
Thank you.